Hello, everybody. I'm Richard Brent, Editor-in-Chief of Briefing Magazine, and a very warm welcome to this event that follows the publication of our Frontiers Legal IT Landscapes research from earlier this month. I note that this first half-hour plenary session with my guests here is being recorded, and please do, though, feel free to interact, comment, or ask quick questions in the chat over to the right of the system here. After this conversation, a reminder also, you'll all be joining one of our Ideas Exchange breakout groups with your peers. These sessions will each dig deeper into one particular area of our research, and they're being co-hosted by a law firm leader and one of our legal IT landscape supporters for 2021, CTS, Intap, Net Documents, and Thomson Reuters. Thanks to all of them. If you haven't yet selected your Ideas Exchange session, please do message Tracy Stevenson, which you can do on the right-hand tab in the chat. Now, you can find all 35 pages of Legal IT Landscapes 2021 online at briefing.co.uk. I don't have time now to get into all of the findings. I'd urge you to devour it. As always, that was carried out at the end of last year on strategic leaders at law firms with annual revenues of 20 million and above. It continues to track a number of data points, things like how much firms are spending on their technology, their movement to the cloud, pressure on security and other potential pain points, and their priorities for future investment. You probably won't be surprised to learn that there were a few changes to our long-term question set for 2021, particularly around intentions and readiness when it comes to a future of more agile working. Now that one is more of a question of priorities for making the reality of that happier and more productive, and how hybrid firms ultimately feel that they need or want to be. But one area that clearly continues to be extremely relevant is the competitive landscape, and that's what we're going to start talking about today. One temperature that we always take is the extent to which firms see other businesses in the market, either like themselves or not, which they can define, of course, as a potential threat. In 2021, a clear majority of firm leaders, 84%, once again describe other firms like themselves as the most threatening businesses to their futures. This was a year, however, that the likes of the Big Four and other large consulting businesses narrowly overtook larger firms in their minds on the threatometer, and businesses that sell, as we define it, a combination of technology and contract lawyering also increased, overtaking the client as a source of competition, only narrowly though. That said, both of those groups only reached 40% and 34% respectively, compared to that 84% for firms like mine. So to discuss what that means on the ground, I'm very pleased to be joined by two representatives of businesses offering legal services that may or may not consider themselves to be an alternative to firms like yours. First up, we've got former journalist and a lawyer at Linklaters, Dana Denis-Smith. She's the founder of Obelisk Support. She founded Obelisk Support in 2010 as a model to help city lawyers work more flexibly. And she's also the founder of the First 100 Years Project, which is charting the journey of women in law since the Sex Disqualification Removal Act of 1919. She's establishing a digital museum about that project. And we also have Kunoor Chopra, who's the Vice President of Legal Services at Elevate, which provides technology consulting and services to legal departments and law firms through operations across the world. It's made some significant moves in the flexible legal resourcing market in recent years, both making acquisitions and striking partnerships with leading law firms for their delivery of flexible lawyering. Kunoor formerly founded the legal process outsourcing company LawScribe in 2004, and Elevate describes itself as the law company. So if I can come to you first, maybe Dana, go right back to that stat that I gave about 84% of firms seeing other firms like themselves, potentially unlike yourself, I suppose, as the most significant threat. Should firms see you as a bigger threat than they do? Or like they appear to?
The market is really changing, and there's definitely enough work for everyone, if I'm honest. I think there is an underserved market. So I guess it depends how you define the client. And then based on that definition is you can say, well, we are competing for the same thing, or we're playing in a very different field. So in the enterprise space, I think it's really heating up. We are competing with well, everybody really, and Elevate included. So we come across, if you like, almost like a stable list of companies that are trying to take some of the market share from the law firms. But lower down the rankings, you know, when you go outside of the big enterprise space, I think it's much more patchy. And we are all there, to be honest, to try to meet an unmet demand, as opposed to trying to, you know, eat off anybody else's table. I think for me, the success is if clients are coming back and we're doing what they need done and we're efficient and we're good. That's there. But I'm definitely not seeing my role in the market purely just to take out other companies. Okay. A lot of work that isn't being done, full stop.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Kunoor, I've got to ask you the same question, I think. Do you see yourself, do you see Elevate as a competitive threat to law firms? And do you think law firms are taking that threat seriously enough?
Sure. So I'll agree with Donna that, look, it's a huge market, right? It's over 850 billion legal services market, and there's a lot of opportunity for all of us to play in it. But taking a look at your survey, I mean, it is surprising to me that law, and I'll be a little controversial to start with, and then I'll show my hand a little bit later. I do think, you know, law firms are mistaken if they think that the biggest threat that they have are law firms like themselves. And I saw that that number actually increased this year compared to your report last year. Look, I think that law companies and law firms, law companies, you talk about alternative legal service providers, right? You know, we use the term law companies. I think law companies and the big four are starting to take a bigger and bigger share of that pie of obtainable legal services. I think 70% of law firms and 50% of law departments have indicated that they use law companies in some shape or form, right? And even those shapes have increased. So when I started in my company in 2004, the market looked very, very different. And so you kind of talked about the world alternative, right? Back then, it was alternative. Now, 16, 17 years later, the market has changed and evolved so much. And you have technology providers and consulting providers, law companies, and the big four who are making big steps, big strides in this space. And so I would say that I would think of them as, I mean, other companies like other law firms like us are going to exist no matter what. But I'd say keep an eye on the law companies and the big four because they are taking a bigger share. And in the last 6 to 12 months, the big four especially, there's so much media out there about how they've been hiring and growing and increasing beyond just providing, right, the legal and auditing services that they have to providing what law companies do.
This year, of course, the law firms, like all other businesses or most other businesses, have had to support mobile working more significantly than they have done, and some have sort of pointed to that as perhaps the beginning of a broader sort of change mindset that they might have lacked in the past, more willingness to change now in the future. Do you see that's likely, Dana?
I think there is no escape anymore, that people have digitized faster maybe than they wanted or expected, but that's really exciting. I mean, for somebody like myself and my business, going on for 10 years about how remote working works and how it creates opportunities for people that normally would be locked out of the workplace, it's really exciting to be able to tap into the widest possible talent pool and really leverage that for the benefit of all those clients that maybe wouldn't get their work done. So to me, I think it's a really great opportunity to change some of the fundamentals in the sector and really be more inclusive ultimately around also the people that get to stay and build careers. And so that is a long-term game. There will be some kind of, obviously we saw today, Mishcon announced they have a fully flexible approach to it. You have other firms that are trying to structure flexibility within a box. So we will see lots of different types of models, and they will be driven by very many reasons, including real estate. If they sit on huge offices, they'd like them to be, with people in them. So lots of firms will be thinking at all the aspects that affect agile working, and they will draft policies based on that. But I expect individual workers to want more digital first experiences anyway. They've got used to it, and they will fight back if anybody tries to claw back the flexibility. But that's great, because I've spent, again, 10 years trying to explain to people that having somebody work from home doesn't make them unproductive. So it's really good not to have to explain that anymore. Everybody has experienced it for 12 months and it's worked well.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Yes. I suppose in our survey we've talked about competition as being being more competitive for clients, but there is this idea of being more competitive for the talent as well, isn't there? Kunoor, what do you think on that score?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot more opportunities for talent out there, right? Again, not just law firms, it's the law companies, it's the big four, it's technology providers, it's consulting companies. So and in-house. And what I've seen is that the in-house law departments are actually a lot more flexible now and are opening opportunities to talent remotely, so that they don't have to be on site in a particular geography. So I thought that could be, I believe that could be a threat to law firms who are looking to, obviously obtain that same talent, because the talent have more options.
Yeah. Do you think that law firms also need to think differently about how they invest in technology or where they do in order to compete with businesses like yours? Kunoor?
Absolutely. And what's interesting to me is I think I've been speaking to law firms again since 2004 about how they can actually be more competitive. I mean, for them to say, hey, we find law firms like ours to be the biggest threat, I think that they have an opportunity. Law firms have an opportunity to find a way to be more competitive against law firms like themselves. Actually, and this is where I think, there's an opportunity for them to actually partner with law companies, right, or with tech providers. So I've spoken to a lot of law firms who actually have pretty good innovation teams internally. They actually do use technology and are very aware of the technology that's out there. Many of them are white labeling some of the leading technologies, say in contract, with AI and review, or building their own. So they actually have the technology in their arsenal. I just don't see them bringing it to the table when they're talking to every single customer. They're very, narrow in how they're bringing it, to their customer base, to their client base. So I think they should actually look at their technology that they do have and bring that to every discussion and talk to their clients about, hey, this is how we can provide more efficient and effective service. This is how we're thinking about you, and we're going to bring technology, and not just technology, right? I think it's right sourcing, it's project management, and that's where I see that opportunity to partner with law companies, where they're not necessarily competition, but partners for law firms.
And Donna, you're working on some bespoke technology yourself, aren't you, for Obelisk? Is that something that you think will give you a competitive edge?
Well, I think so. I mean, it's born out of our, lessons learned, if you like, from the past 10 years around managing remote teams and, managing a mixed remote and on-site environment, which takes quite a lot of fine tuning, I think, to build the trust between the different communities to make sure it's seamless. So we're building that tool to help talent when they return to be properly managed, regardless of where they are. But I think going back to your question, what should they build? And I think, to be honest, it's about aligning to the product and it's what is your strategy? What is, if you're a Magic Circle law firm, you are commanding and people are very often happy to pay a premium price for certain types of products. Would technology enhance that? And what will it do differently that will really benefit that client? Are these conversations taking place? I think, we've seen a lot of movement around, people into Big Four or whatever, but it's about really articulating the strategy and then aligning the technology underneath to really understand the products, the services you offer. And, you see firms like Linklaters putting out products that are tech products out into the market, testing it, but they're linked to their expertise. So they're very, legal kind of tools. Whereas for me, our focus has always been optimizing talent. And I think that is the biggest waste, if I can put it that way, in the legal profession. Is the biggest cost and the biggest waste. And therefore, I'm interested in how can we optimize that aspect of the professional services world.
A big competitive point of differentiation will open up in the market there around how firms enable their people to work, because that's another where firms allow their people to work in the longer term, how much time in the office, how much time out of the office, for example.
I would say so. I think we'll see a very patchy picture coming our way. And it will be very interesting to observe how firms take it. And I think there will be, very, very clear reasons why they take certain views. But It doesn't mean that something that will happen in the next 5 years will remain on the market in the years after, right? So it could be adjustments, and you will just have to observe and see how they play it. But I think there will be a choice where they go.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And Kunoor, what do you think on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that, talent have, as I said before, talent have a lot more options because of the flexibility that companies around the globe are offering, right? First, it was just the elevates, right? And so they thought, hey, we can work with law companies who are being more flexible. But now law firms as well as in-house, law departments are bringing that to the table.
Yeah. And one area that we haven't specifically asked about in legal IT landscapes, but I know that some other research has found recently, is around law firms collaborating with, for want of a different word, their alternatives. However, some people have said to me that perhaps happens not quite as much as might be talked about at the moment. Is that the case? And what would you see sort of changing that if indeed it's something that you would welcome and would like law firms to do more of? Can I start with Kunoor maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, I think there's an opportunity, and so I agree with your statement that it's not where it should be, but it has changed a lot. And I'll be honest, when we started Elevate, really our focus has been to support the legal industry, law departments, and law firms. However, until maybe I'd say 24 months ago, I personally was almost ready to give up because I felt like we were having these conversations and law firms really weren't getting it, that there was an opportunity for them to leverage a lot of what companies like us bring to the table to get ahead of their competition. Again, I started to see that change in probably the last 12 or 18 months. We're working with a lot more law firms who want to work differently, who want to be more efficient, who want to bring some of the discipline that we bring around process and technology and that right sourcing element, right people, right location, right tasks. But it's still slow to move. It isn't where it needs to be. And some of the most innovative law firms that we're talking to still are very narrow in their view of how they want to use a law firm. So as an example, with one law firm that we're working with, we actually help supply kind of the flex talent that they bring to their law departments. To them, they see that as innovative. Yet there's so much more behind that in terms of actually being able to leverage pools of contract attorneys to do LIBOR review, or to take on full portfolios of work. So there's still a lot more opportunity. And going to your question of what will change, how will law firms actually start to be more competitive and leverage a lot of these resources available? I think it's pressure from the customers, it's pressure from their clients, right? But even then, I think we're going to see that shift as the generation starts to shift, because still a lot of the partners are of a generation where we're going to be retiring in 5 or 7 years. We don't want to rock the boat, so let's just wait and implement the change. So I think the younger generation, as they start to move up, I think will start to make more of the changes that we would like to see.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Dana, do you want to collaborate? You've already said you don't see yourself necessarily as taking law firms' work, but do you want to collaborate with them? And do you think they are ready to collaborate with you and have those processes in place to enable them to do so?
So we do. I mean, we have strategic partnerships with a few firms, and it's definitely a very different way of working with law firms from working with corporate as enterprise level corporate clients. What I think law firms don't understand is how the supply chain works. They understand their internal supply chain, which involves all full service, partner, pyramid, and all of that. When you start when you start procuring from outside your organizations, you've got to build another supply chain, and you need to be able to articulate your value proposition against that supply chain, which is where the confusion lies. So if they think they want to be a flexible legal support provider or flexible resourcing or something, then obviously that conflicts with their other setup. And I think I will see some consolidation of this space, because quite a lot of captives have emerged in the flexible talent pool, for example, space. And that's because they're trying to capture everything outside in the supply chain that really doesn't belong to them. So they need to optimize their own top level above the kind of above ground level, but they keep meddling in below level. And they're not doing it with much heart. They're doing it with half-hearted investment. They're doing it because they feel they need to be seen to innovate. And they actually have told me that, some of them to my face. And it's not, that means that the partnership model itself, where their value lies, is not being optimized at all, because they're trying to go too broad, just to be seen to be active in every space. Now, obviously, they would say, well, look at the big four, they meddle in everything, and that seems to work for them. So, there's counter arguments to it. But I think our type of services in accounting are very different. So, there's a whole different level of access to clients and to needs that accounting firms have, that legal is slightly more narrow vertical, right? So I think they need, it always starts with strategy, and then understanding, do you want to keep it in your internal supply chain? Does it make sense? Does it cost you? Is it really adding value? I mean, what is the value of having a talent pool that overlaps 80% with everybody else you're competing with outside of your own firm? And then just because you're then, trying to sell it to your clients, is there really value in that? And the point is, I don't think these questions have really been tackled, because for the time being, they are appearing to be innovating, as Kunoor says. So we're in that space where, showing some kind of innovation is what counts, as opposed to what is the substantive change that your firm needs. And I think in 5 years' time, a lot of them will realize they'll divest or buy from somewhere else, because it makes no sense to manage that internally.
And I agree, and that's why I think there's that partnership opportunity, right, with companies like ours. So they should focus on their core, what they're really good at, and really leverage what our companies can bring to the table as partners.
We have to ask, spend a bit of time perhaps talking about one other potential source of competitiveness, I suppose, tied to talent, which is diversity and inclusion. Do you see that what you're doing in the D&I space potentially gives you a competitive advantage over other businesses? Kunoor, sorry.
Absolutely. I think law, again, this is one area where law firms can really get ahead of their competition. Their clients are looking for diverse staffing. They know that diverse engagements are successful. They know diverse companies are successful companies. And so they want to see that their law firms are also bringing that diversity to the table, because they know, aside from obviously it being the right thing to do, they know that it's going to help over the course of their engagement and help in the handling of their matter. And so we're working with a lot of law departments where D&I is at the front, at the front of their minds. When they're engaging their law firms in RFPs, for example, they're asking the question, are you going to bring a diverse staff to the engagement? What will that look like? And then they're hiring us to actually monitor and measure that over the engagement to make sure that the law firms are doing that. And most recently, the General Counsel of Coca-Cola actually said, look, we are going to stop supporting law firms. We're going to reduce revenue for law firms who are not bringing diverse staff to the engagements. They said that they're going to require at least 30% diversity. And a lot of this, of course, in the last year has been in response to, the Black Lives Matter movement in the US. But, they said we want to see at least 30% diverse candidates who are supporting our engagements. We want that measured. We want you to report on that. And if you don't, we're going to reduce your fees by 30%. And so it's important. And going back to the question of how will law firms change is going to be what General Counsel is doing, something similar to what the GC of Coca-Cola has done, which is really putting that pressure on the law firms to change.
And when you say you're involved in some of the monitoring of that, when you're sort of having conversations with firms about that, do you find that they're taking that seriously enough at the moment?
I do think they are. But the challenge is, what they have to do is they have to make that extra effort and be intentional about hiring people. They can't just say, oh, well, the pipeline isn't there. That's not a good enough excuse. So yes, I think that it is front of mind. And when we're talking to them, they do ask us, especially for supporting them, and finding resources, please help find diverse candidates. And we just encourage them to be more and more thoughtful, as they're looking to staff their engagements.
Dana, how about you on that one? Can you? I mean, there was quite a lot at the end of last year. We saw a lot of firms sort of making announcements about new targets, for example, in the diversity space. Is that a positive sign for you, or do you think that there's a lot more still to be done there?
Well, there's really two aspects to diversity. One is how do we make the access to the legal profession possible for diverse, socially mobile type of talent. Very often is a racial aspect to that. There's underrepresentation within the firms at all levels. More difficult to access a training contract if you are from a diverse, racially diverse, in particular, background. Women are starting to make some more progress, I would say, but they've been at it for 100 years, and finally we're seeing some signs. At the very top, which is the other end, everybody's being held back by the partnership model. The way in which the kind of magic of how you make it to be a partner is too magical. So basically it's too difficult for people that are not coming with all that information, and they might not have the right sponsorship internally to understand what does it take to get to the top. And so I'm quite excited that we'll have probably 2 Magic Circle firms with senior partner women by the look of it. It looks like Linklaters will have one because there's 3 women in the race, so there must be a woman at the end. And Freshfields obviously have a woman now. So it's looking like the top is starting to crack, but obviously a lot of people, when you have such a select group of people at the top that are different, they'll be watching out for signs of failure. So a lot will depend on how well they do for the firm, for what will happen to the generation that comes behind them, and also how seriously they themselves take it to bring the changes in the law firms. And in my conversation with, say, Georgia Dawson, she was very committed. She'd figured out ways where the blockages, she'd experienced it herself. So she was clear that she had to have a very clear plan to make diversity really embed in the firm. But I think there are a lot of firms that are not doing enough. So she's unusual. Freshfields are ahead of the curve. You have the bulk probably trying to, make it up as they go along. But definitely, we've seen progress because there is a majority female legal professional on the solicitor side. So we can't deny that there's been a lot of progress. The point is, where do we want to accelerate? And access to the leadership is one of them. And I'm not sure it's going to happen with targets, and that would be a very long time.
Firms take the hybrid working idea will make a big difference to this as well, do you think?
I hope so. That's if they understand that part of the deal is to also not drop out people or not to undervalue their contribution if they are remote, for example. So leveling that playing field between visibility of outside of the office and inside the office is really important. And they need to be deliberate to view those that are working from home as contributor to the firm.
In the very closing minute, maybe to take this idea of this being labelled alternative sort of head on, maybe. We don't have very long to discuss it, but alternative, a useful label or not? Kunoor?
No, absolutely not. I think 17 years ago, yes, it was alternative, right? No one had heard of outsourcing legal services. It was all being obtained through law firms. So yes, we saw that alternatives were there. Now it's mainstream. Again, you look at the statistics, right? 70% of law firms, over 50% of law departments are using law companies. So I'd say we're sitting right there next to the law firms, supporting the law departments as well as the law firms. So, which is why we coined the phrase law company, right? So yeah.
What about you? What's in a name there?
Well, I always like this question. Well, to be honest, I think for me, this kind of othering of companies is not helpful because it does also suggest to me, at least to the buyer end, that you have a very non-inclusive way of seeing the ecosystem. If there's not a bunch in and the bunch out, simply because the market has deregulated to allow us to all be in. So to me, we have a lot of work to do around supplier diversity. And really, female-founded businesses, minority-founded businesses, scale-ups, startups, all of these companies should be having a place in the ecosystem and have an opportunity, exactly like talent, to grow and succeed. But I'm not seeing that kind of embracing approach. So I think labels are not helpful because what we need to really understand is that we're all inside because of the deregulation of the market. And therefore, there's nobody on the outside to be alternative or anything else. We're here to supply services to customers that need them.
We're at the end of our session there. you very much to Dana Denis-Smith from Obelisk Law and Kunoor Chopra from Elevate. Perhaps we can catch up again when we do our survey next year to see what difference has been made, if any. Thank you.
Thank you. That flew by.
Okay, indeed.